Hello and welcome. You have found a quiet place and a little time, and that is enough. If it helps, let your eyes rest closed, or let your gaze soften on something still in the room. Nothing here needs your hurry. Take a slow breath in, if that feels easy. Let the breath leave you without effort, like mist lifting from a field when the sun has not yet decided to show itself. As you breathe out, let your shoulders soften. You do not have to hold them. Let the weight of the day ease away from your neck, down along your arms, until your hands rest as they are, unclenched, unneeded for a little while. Another breath, if you like. The space between one breath and the next does not ask anything of you. Tonight we travel only in imagination, to the soft edges of a story almost everyone has heard in fragments. Patrick, remembered as the bringer of Christianity to Ireland, a name carried on spring days and on quiet holidays, on church walls and on postcards, reshaped by centuries until the man inside the legend becomes gentle weather rather than a shout. We are not marching toward argument as a thing to fear. We are leaning toward a life that understood patience the way a river understands stone, slowly, without needing to win every debate, with persistence that outlasts noise. Picture green first, because this story loves the ordinary surface of an island. Imagine grass after rain, hills that roll without hurry, a coast where the sea arranges and rearranges its silver lines. Imagine small settlements, smoke thin against the sky, paths worn by feet and hooves, the sound of a bell, not as alarm but as punctuation in a long day. You do not need to map every inlet. It is enough to feel Ireland as a place where stories could arrive on foot, where a traveller could become a guest, where a teacher could speak softly and still be heard across lifetimes. Let the air in this imagined Ireland be cool enough to feel clean in the lungs, mild enough that you never have to brace against it. Let there be cattle in the distance, low shapes against the slope. Their presence, a kind of patience you do not have to think about. Let there be a stream finding its way downhill, not loud, only persistent. The way some truths arrive, not as announcement, but as steady sound you can walk beside until walking becomes rest. Spring, when it comes in the calendar that later generations would attach to Patrick's name, is not only green, it is light returning by minutes, lambs and longer evenings, mud that remembers winter and still chooses to soften. You do not need to picture every blossom. You can feel the season as a mood. Renewal without hurry, hope without a scoreboard, the world willing to try again without demanding perfection from anyone who walks through it. If you have ever stood at the edge of land and watched water move without asking your opinion, you already know something this story likes. That vast things can continue their work while you stand still. The Irish Sea, in imagination, can be wide silver, a threshold between one life and another, between captivity and return, between fear and the first thin line of courage. You do not have to cross it tonight. You only have to let the image be wide enough that your breathing can widen with it, slow and tidal. There is also room here for ordinary kindness. A bull passed, a fire tended, a stranger offered shelter because weather and darkness are older than borders. Patrick's story, when it is told for sleep, borrows that texture. It asks you to believe that people can learn mercy in small rooms before they try to carry it across a whole island. It asks you to trust that listening can be as holy as speaking, that a night of rest can be as honest as a day of labor. If your mind begins to name tasks or replay conversations, you need not push those thoughts away. Notice them the way you might notice a bird crossing high above. Then return your attention to the grass, to the breath, to the slack in your shoulders, and the quiet weight of your body where it rests. take another slow breath, and with the exhale, imagine your shoulders dropping a fraction more, as if someone kind had placed warm hands there and said, without words, you may rest now. The place where your shoulder meets your arm is a small junction that often carries tension without announcement. You do not have to fix it. Breathe toward it, the way you might breathe warmth into cold hands, and let the muscles answer in their own time. In Irish memory, saints are sometimes more than biography. They are patience, they are return, they are the willingness to believe that a person can change direction without pretending the past never happened. Patrick belongs to that kind of memory, a name carried for centuries, softened at edges where sharpness might wound a listener. For tonight, we let the tale be gentle. We let hardship become distant weather rather than a storm overhead. We let faith become warmth rather than a trial, because you are here to drift, not to brace. You do not need to memorize every date before you rest. Historians discuss what can be known about a man who lived so long ago that records arrive like patches of light through leaves. A few letters attributed to his own hand, later lives written by admirers, archaeology that whispers rather than shouts. For our sleep-friendly path, we need only understand the emotional shape. That a boy could be taken far from home, that he could learn to listen in solitude, that he could return with a message he believed was larger than himself, and that an island could receive that message in its own time, through language, through symbol, through the slow work of community. Imagine yourself walking a path without haste. The ground underfoot is soft with old leaves. Fern brushes quietly. A trunk passes close enough that you could touch bark if you wished. Rough in places, smooth in others. The world narrows to the next step. The next slow breath. The gentle loosening of your shoulders once more. As if the path itself were reminding you that you may carry less. There is a kindness in arriving somewhere that does not require proof. You do not need a ticket in this telling. You do not need to know every scholarly debate about Patrick's birthplace, every detail of Roman Britain, every quarrel over chronology. Your presence is enough. Your willingness to drift in thought without straining. Your permission to let the day dissolve a little at the edges. When you imagine the horizon, let it be wide enough that your thoughts do not bump the edges. Let there be silence between sentences in your mind. If a memory rises, let it rise like a bird, circle once, and glide away. You can always return to the path, to the breath, to the softening at the tops of the arms where the day used to sit. The night deepens by degrees too small to count one by one. You might not notice until the sky feels closer, softer, more like a blanket lowered than a door shut tight. That is the kind of darkness that helps sleep, not the kind that startles. You are allowed to trust it a little. Let your hands rest where they are. Let your feet feel supported, whether you are lying down or sitting. The body knows how to soften when the mind stops insisting. Give it a little trust. Another breath. Shoulders wide and loose. The path holds its shape without needing praise. Notice, if you can, without strain, the place where your ribs widen slightly when you breathe in, and soften when you breathe out. That motion does not need coaching. It is older than any story, older than any saint, as reliable as tide. You can borrow its rhythm for a minute and let everything else wait. The small worries, the medium plans, the large questions that pretend they need answers before dawn. They can wait on the far side of the field while you stay here, where the grass is imagined and the night is real. If your face has held an expression all day, concentration, politeness, the slight guard we wear in bright rooms, you can let that expression dissolve now. muscle by muscle, the way cloud dissolves when wind finds a gap. Your forehead can be smooth, your mouth can rest. Even your ears can stop listening for problems for a little while. They can listen instead to silence, or to the faint hum of a room, or to nothing at all. We are nearly at the kind of arrival that needs no gate. Patrick's story is long in its full scholarly form, crossing empires and islands, touching captivity and courage, brushing against miracles only as distant light rather than as lightning overhead. Tonight we will walk only as far as calm allows, letting years pass in phrases rather than in minutes, letting faith be real without becoming sharp enough to cut. You can feel, if you like, a slight widening in your chest as you breathe, as if the evening had made a little more room inside you. You do not have to hold that feeling. Let it spread and fade, the way light spreads and fades, the way stories begin in dimness and become clear only gradually. And now that you have arrived, not with a shout but with a long exhale, we can let the tale unfold in its own time, the way mist moves when it has nowhere urgent to be. There will be sea and a hill, patience and return, but all of it will come gently like footsteps on soft ground, like someone speaking in the next room, voice low enough that you do not have to lean forward to catch every word. Rest here a moment on the path, wherever your mind has placed you. Feel the earth steady beneath you. Feel your breath steady within you. When you are ready, the story will continue, not to startle you, but to accompany you, the way still air accompanies a candle flame, holding its shape without breaking it. Long ago, in the late years of Roman influence in Britain, a boy lived in a world of families and chores, language and expectation, the ordinary scaffolding of a life that did not yet know it would become a story. The names of his parents matter to historians. For sleep, it is enough to imagine a household with work to do, with love imperfect and real, with the small sounds of a settlement, a door, a pot, rain deciding which roof to visit first. History places Patrick in a landscape touched by Rome, not always as centre, but as neighbour. Roads, coins, habits of thought that moved through Britain like weather. You do not need to hold a map of provinces tonight. You can think simply of a boy who spoke one life and would later speak another, who had not yet learned how wide a sea could feel when home became a memory carried inside the chest. Roman Britain, in the broad strokes that matter for a sleep story, was a place of towns and trade, soldiers and stone, Latin echoing in official ears, while older languages still lived in kitchens and fields. Patrick's father appears in the tradition as someone with a place in that world, a deacon's son who would later be called to holy orders himself. None of that detail needs to become a lesson tonight. It only sketches context, that Christianity was not unknown in his childhood, that faith could be both household and public, that the boy who would cross water twice had already lived inside a mixed world where empires touched lives without owning every corner of them. Childhood, in gentle memory, is chores and games, hunger and fullness, the small dramas of siblings and neighbours, the first awareness that adults can be frightened without explaining why. The boy who becomes Patrick may have learned early that the sea was both road and danger, that winter could sharpen a house, that spring was never guaranteed but often arrived anyway. You can hold all of that as texture, not as biography to be tested. The emotional truth is simpler. He began as someone ordinary enough that his later story surprises by contrast, not by spectacle. The tale turns, as tales do, toward difficulty. Raiders crossed water. A young person could be taken, carried away from the familiar, set down in a world where language and power arranged themselves differently. Sleep-friendly telling does not linger on cruelties close up. It acknowledges the fact of separation, the weight of labour, the long outdoor hours, the mind learning to pay attention, because attention is how animals and weather are survived. In such seasons, faith sometimes arrives not as a sermon, but as a whisper. That existence is held by something larger than the immediate hand that commands. Patrick's years in Ireland, in many versions of the story, include watching and tending, learning the land's rhythms even while longing for elsewhere. Hills become teachers when you walk them because you must. Rain becomes a companion when it returns often enough to feel like personality. The heart can grow a kind of steadiness that looks like patience from the outside and feels like endurance within. You do not need to catalogue every task. It is enough to know that a boy became a young man with a secret inner room where prayer could occur without permission from anyone else. Language in such a season can be both barrier and bridge. A captive ear learns unfamiliar sounds. A mind hungry for home may cling to the words it remembers until those words become prayer without performance. The Ireland of early medieval imagination is not one uniform country, but many places with many names, kin, groups and kings, cattle and poetry, law carried in memory rather than only in ink. Patrick's later writings suggest a man who knew he was stepping into complexity. Not a blank slate, not a simple audience, but a web of loyalties and traditions that would test any message, however gentle. If you are listening for blame or triumph in this chapter of the story, you may not find it in the shape you expect. Sleep narration asks instead for honesty without cruelty. That harm happened, that people survived. That inner life can grow even when outer life is narrow. The boy who tended flocks could still watch stars. The young man who longed for escape could still practice gratitude in small increments. That is not romanticizing pain. It is refusing to let the night's story become a catalogue of wounds. Your nervous system has carried enough today without carrying every historical sharpness. Escape, when it comes in the narrative, arrives as both event and symbol. A long journey toward reunion, toward the possibility of study, toward a life that could be chosen rather than only endured. Roads and ships, risk and trust, the body leaning into movement as if the world might widen again. For sleep, we let the escape be distance rather than chase, weather rather than weapon, the way a difficult chapter can end without needing to be reread in detail. In Gaul and beyond, in the imagination of later writers, Patrick gathers learning. Scripture, liturgy, the habits of mind that let a person speak clearly about invisible things. Monastic life, in its gentler descriptions, is rhythm. Bells, hours, work shared, silence valued. You do not need to picture every manuscript. You can imagine candlelight on wood, a voice practicing a phrase until the tongue believes it. The slow accumulation of confidence that does not need to shout. Ordination, when it comes, is not a firework in this telling. It is a deepening, a public yes after a long private conversation. The man who returns to Ireland is not a boy anymore, but neither is he a general. He carries a staff, perhaps, in the mind's eye, not as weapon, but as support for roads that will not always be kind. He carries a book in spirit, even if the road makes paper precious. He carries memory of his own vulnerability, which can be a strange kind of strength. The leader who remembers what it was like to have no power. Yet memory, for Patrick, was not only a private comfort. Ireland remained, an island that had held his suffering and also strangely his formation. Dreams and visions gather around his return, the way mist gathers in valleys, not as proof for a courtroom, but as inner weather strong enough to steer a life. He speaks of a call to walk among people who had not asked for him, to speak of mercy in a vocabulary they could receive, to baptize and teach, to endure opposition without turning every disagreement into a war. When a teacher returns to a place that once held him powerless, psychology alone is a kind of epic. The choice not to repay harm in kind, the choice to offer language that includes forgiveness, the choice to stand in public and be patient. Patrick's letters, read by scholars as glimpses of the man himself, show concern for the vulnerable, anger at exploitation, a mind trying to align power with care. For tonight, we need not dissect every sentence. We can notice the emotional truth. That leadership in his story includes restraint. The Ireland Patrick met was not empty of belief. Traditions older than his message had already taught people to honour thresholds, seasons, spirits of place. Christianity, in its arrival, did not float above the soil. It learned local shoes. Holy wells and older stories sometimes share fences, not because history is simple, but because human beings rarely throw away meaning overnight. For sleep, we let that coexistence be softness, not a battle diagram, the sense that new songs can enter a landscape without erasing every older note on the first day. Later centuries would weave Irish Christianity into manuscripts of breathtaking beauty, into poetry that could hold grief and wonder in the same line, into monastic communities whose reach extended far beyond the island's edge. Patrick's own pen could not see all of that future. He could only plant in the soil he knew. Sleep storytelling allows us to feel the arc without turning it into a classroom timeline. Beginnings as seeds, endings as forests, and in between the ordinary rain of days. Even the conflicts that history records, between kin groups, between old practices and new vows, between pride and humility, do not need to enter this room as shouting. We can acknowledge that human beings disagree, that power misbehaves, that courage and compromise both leave fingerprints on the record, and still choose narration that keeps your breath long and your brow unlined. The goal is not to erase difficulty from history. The goal is to let your body rest while the mind travels gently. Patrick's ministry in the gentlest summaries moves along rivers of ordinary life. Baptism in cold water, explanations offered beside fields, the slow growth of communities that pray together, share meals, bury their dead with new words around the grave. Miracles gather in the tradition like dew, not as proofs for skeptics, but as images of kindness multiplied, of harm stilled, of freedom offered to those caught in bondage. You do not need to believe each tale literally to feel the mood. That a person could become a conduit for help, rather than for additional fear. Saul in County Down is remembered in tradition as a beginning place. A barn of shelter, a small fire of welcome, the first foothold of a mission that would grow far beyond any single roof. You do not need to see the boards or smell the hay. You can think of beginning as a modest gesture, a door left open, a willingness to stay when fear says run. Great stories often start smaller than their endings. Symbols arrive, friendly to memory. The shamrock, in later folklore, becomes a teaching tool. 3 leaves, 1 stem, a way to speak about mystery without demanding that the mind finish its homework before bedtime. Whether the story is old or embroidered matters less tonight than the emotional gesture. That complexity can be held in something small enough to fit in a hand, that the divine might be approached through the natural world rather than only through argument. Legends place Patrick on hills and beside springs, at thresholds of kingdoms, in conversation with those who hold power. Sleep-friendly narration can translate such scenes into distance and weather. A long walk, a wind that tests balance, a night when courage means staying awake without fanfare. The point is not spectacle. The point is fidelity, day after day, to a calling that does not promise ease. Snakes, in one famous folklore layer, are said to have left Ireland at Patrick's word. Historians will tell you Ireland's cool climate never favoured the kind of serpent crowds that story implies. For sleep, the image can still serve as metaphor without deceit. A land freed of a particular kind of dread. A mind freed of a particular kind of poison. A story choosing to end certain troubles in symbol rather than in blood. You can let the snakes be thoughts that slither away when the room grows quiet, if that helps you rest. You are not signing a contract with myth. You are borrowing a picture. Time in hagiography is not a clock. It is a tide. Years accumulate like grass growing over a path until the path becomes landscape. Patrick ages in stories the way mountains do. Slowly, visibly, only when you step back and measure. Between one baptism and the next, between one king's hall and the next spring, whole seasons can pass without a chronicler noting them. That is how lives actually feel from the inside, not as a list of achievements, but as weather, meals, nights that were too short or too long, friendships that thickened, misunderstandings that had to be walked through, rather than solved in a sentence. Patrick's story, compressed for memory, still hints at that dailiness if you listen for it. The teacher who must eat, the traveller who must sleep, the man whose courage includes ordinary fatigue. Armagh, in tradition, becomes a centre, a sea, a place where bells organise the day. Bells in a sleep story are not alarms. They are gentle punctuation, reminders that hours belong to someone larger than appetite. You can imagine metal shaped with care, rope worn smooth by hands, sound travelling across wet air to touch a listener who did not know they were listening for it. To stand in Armagh in imagination is not to stand in a modern city with all its noise. It is to stand where stone begins to mean more than shelter, where a community agrees, slowly, that certain hours belong to prayer, where the horizon of an island feels a little more gathered than scattered. You need not see spires. You can feel the emotional architecture. Centre, return, a place people might walk toward when their inner weather grows stormy. Scholars argue details. Saints' lives argue meaning. Your rest does not depend on winning those arguments. It depends on whether the story leaves room for mercy, whether the memory of Patrick can soften a listener rather than arm them. Tonight we choose softness on purpose, not because history is always soft, it is not, but because your breath deserves a wide field. Slavery, which Patrick condemned, remains in his story as moral fact rather than as scene we need to rehearse. The man who once laboured without choice becomes a voice against taking others in chains. Myth and history both love that symmetry, the wound becoming a compass. For your nervous system tonight, it is enough to hold the gentler idea that stories can turn pain into a vow toward mercy without demanding that you examine your own past like a wound that needs poking. Opposition appears in the texts, threats, difficulty, moments where safety is not guaranteed. Sleep narration can widen those moments into weather, a darkened road, a doubt that sits in the stomach, a choice to continue anyway, because love has become a habit stronger than fear. Courage, in this register, is not adrenaline. It is a long breath taken before a hard task, then the task done without theatrical flourish. Women and men moved through Patrick's orbit as companions, supporters, sometimes as figures of resistance or complexity. Names accumulate in later lists. Holiness, in Irish imagination, likes company. You do not need to memorize a roster. You can think of community as a blanket wide enough for many temperatures. Some people drawn by curiosity, some by need, some by loyalty, all learning a new song at different speeds. The island itself, in Patrick's centuries, was a patchwork of kingdoms and kindreds, languages and loyalties, beauty and hardship braided together. Christianity did not arrive as a single stamp. It spread like heather, patch by patch, sometimes because rulers leaned in, sometimes because ordinary people found hope in the message, sometimes because the old world and the new negotiated at the edges of fields. For sleep, we let that complexity be a soft murmur rather than a lecture. The sense that change in human lives is rarely one clean line. Ireland's early Christian centuries would eventually leave stone-high crosses, round towers, monastic ruins that tourists photograph in rain. Those stones were not yet the dominant skyline in Patrick's own lifetime in the way they would be centuries later. The story we tell is partly foreshadowing, partly the long echo of a beginning. You can think of Patrick less as the man who built every wall and more as one of the voices that helped a culture learn a new vocabulary for hope. One baptism at a time, one generation teaching the next how to pray with the land, rather than only on top of it. Croagh Patrick in the west rises in tradition as a mountain of pilgrimage, a steep invitation to those who want to pray with their legs as well as their lips. You do not need to climb it tonight. You can imagine it as a silhouette against evening, a slope that asks for effort but not for hatred of the body, a place where sky feels close enough to whisper. Pilgrimage, in gentle telling, is not tourism. It is slowness chosen on purpose. The way sleep chooses you when you stop striving. Downpatrick, in the east, gathers stories of ending. A grave, a cathedral's long memory, bones resting where later generations come to stand quietly. Death, for a saint's story, is not defeat. It is return in another key, the way a bell returns to silence and still changes the air. You do not need to believe every detail of burial place to feel the emotional shape. That a life can conclude and still walk beside people in symbol, in festival, in the habit of blessing. Patrick's legacy also lives in the smallest objects. A cross scratched on stone, a phrase learned by heart, a well-blessed and revisited, a feast day that arrives each spring with rain and shy light. Legacy, in this sense, is not fame. It is repetition without boredom. The way seasons repeat and still feel new when you are paying attention. Across the Irish diaspora, his name travelled in pockets and prayers, in songs both sincere and teasing, in the green that appears once a year on lapels, and in hearts that feel a tug toward an island they may never have seen. That is another kind of story, not geography alone, but longing, belonging, identity braided with myth until a single figure can hold more meaning than one life could strictly carry. For tonight you do not have to sort every layer. You can let the name be a warm stone in the hand, smooth from handling, weight familiar, edges gentled by time. If your thoughts drift toward your own teachers, your own moments of calling, your own roads you did not expect to walk, let those thoughts be held gently, not examined like a wound that needs poking. The tale offers companionship, not comparison. You do not have to measure your life against a legend. You only have to breathe and let the Irish evening of the story hold you forward without hurry. Evening after evening, the island repeats its simple lessons. Tide, starlight, the way darkness gathers without slamming a door. The story receives those lessons until receiving becomes peace, not certainty. As the world often sells it, but peace as steadiness, as breath shared with hills, as the decision to remain soft when hardness offers itself as easier. The myth is not finished. Patrick still walks in parades and in quiet prayers, in jokes and in scholarship, in the hands of people who pinch shamrock once a year, and in the hearts of those who never speak his name and still learn mercy, Rest in that in-between space with us a little longer, where the story has room to widen, where the night is large enough for faith without clamour, where the next breath comes as reliably as the last. Before we drift toward the deepest part of night, linger with one more image of Ireland. Not as argument, not as headline, but as a green hush after rain, a road narrowing between hedges, a bell somewhere far enough that you cannot see the tower, only feel the idea of sound. Let the hedges be dark with leaf. Let the road be damp enough that tire or hoof would hush against it. Let the air smell of earth and salt depending on which way the wind leans. You are not travelling this road for miles. You are only borrowing its mood, the way a person borrows a friend's coat. Temporary, kind, enough to keep the chill from your story while you settle. The path, if you are still with it in imagination, has grown quieter and deeper. The urgent sounds of daybirds have given way to a softer hush, the kind that fills a valley when the wind rests. Here, nothing races. Everything turns gently, slowly, as if the world had decided to think in longer sentences. Your breath can follow that widening. Inhale without grabbing at air. Exhale without pushing it away. Let the space between breaths be a kind of still pool too. Untroubled, sufficient. If your body has found a comfortable position, there is nothing more you need to change. If something itches or aches slightly, you need not battle it. Notice it the way you might notice a leaf touching the surface of a pond, then return to the wide pool of your attention, soft at the edges, easy in the middle. Let attention move down through you without hurry, not as inspection, but as kindness. Crown of the head soft, temples unclenched, back teeth not grinding, throat open, collarbones wide, heart not asked to perform, only to beat. Stomach allowed to be heavy or empty without commentary, hips settling, knees pointing wherever they point, ankles forgotten on purpose, toes released from any last grip on the day. Let your hips feel heavy if you are lying down, as if the mattress were moss and earth supporting your weight completely. Let your legs be long and loose, feet allowed to fall outward slightly, toes uncurled. Let your belly rise and fall with breath without any special effort. Let your arms rest where they fall, elbows soft, hands empty of purpose. Shoulders again if they have tightened, let them melt downward, heavy as hills resting under cloud, secure and still, neck long, jaw unclenched, face smooth. The story you heard does not require you to remember every date or every debate. It asked only for your willingness to travel beside it for a while, to let Irish grass and Irish dreaming touch your night without demanding anything in return. If your mind wants to revisit the tale, let it revisit in fragments. A bell, a shoreline, a shamrock held in an open palm, a boy who learned to pray in rain. None of these images needs to sharpen into detail. They can blur. The way a shoreline blurs in mist, present, but gentle. Let your jaw relax if it is tightened. Let your forehead smooth. Let your breath slow until it feels like something you are not doing so much as receiving. The way you receive shade when you step under a tree. If there is a small knot of tension in your lower back, you need not wrestle it. Imagine warmth spreading there slowly, like sunlight, finding a patch of ground after a long morning. Imagine your legs as heavy as logs resting on soft earth. Not pinned, not trapped, only supported. Outside the story in the living world, Ireland's fields and towns continue their ordinary miracles. People waking, kettles singing, buses moving along roads that follow older tracks. None of that needs your action now. You have done enough for this day by arriving here, by breathing, by letting your thoughts grow slower. The land itself, beyond any single life, holds a long memory of rain. Roots drink quietly. Nothing in that hidden work needs you to manage it tonight. You can belong to the larger pattern simply by resting, simply by letting your nervous system believe, for a little while, that the world will keep turning without your supervision. Let any remaining tension in your brow smooth away. Let your tongue rest softly in your mouth. Let your eyes, behind closed lids, feel heavy as stones warmed by sun. No effort, no watching. Only the gentle permission to stop looking for lessons. Imagine moonlight, if you like, laying a path across a quiet road. Imagine mist gathering so lightly that the far trees become a suggestion, rather than a fact. Imagine a bell ringing once, somewhere beyond the hill, proof that sound can travel without needing an audience. Imagine, too, the sound you are not hearing, wind and grass so constant it becomes a kind of silence. Imagine that silence as a blanket you can pull up to your chin, not to hide from the world, but to meet it more softly without the sharp edges of planning. If thoughts arrive about tomorrow, you need not solve them. Place them on a leaf in your mind and let the current carry them around the bend. They can wait there until morning, if morning asks for them. Many worries, in daylight, shrink on their own when they are not fed through the night with tension. The story of Patrick, for all its centuries, has now done what we asked of it. It walked beside you without demanding a verdict. You can set the narrative down as you might set down a walking stick at the door. Grateful, finished with it for now, free to move through the rest of the house without leaning. If sleep is near, you do not have to chase it. Sleep arrives the way faith sometimes arrives in stories. Not always with the trumpet, sometimes with a softness you cannot name, sometimes after a long waiting you stopped measuring. Let your eyelids feel heavier. Let your thoughts become simple ripples that grow smaller and smaller until the water is glass again. You might notice the slowing of your heartbeat, not as a thing to measure, but as a distant drum becoming gentler. You might notice warmth in your hands as vessels widen and hold less tightly to the day. You might notice the room's small sounds, a house settling, fabric shifting, and find them harmless, even friendly part of the night's texture rather than interruptions. The river meets the sea in the long geography of dreams, and the sea does not ask the river to explain its journey. Your breathing meets the night the same way, without needing an explanation. In and out, a little slower, a little softer. Between breaths, there is a small stillness. Rest in that stillness without naming it. It is enough like a well, dark, deep, dependable. It is enough like a place where moonlight gathers without breaking. If counting helps, you might count backwards from 5. Not as task, but as ritual. 5 for the hills, 4 for the shore, 3 for the bell, 2 for the shamrock's leaves, 1 for the room that holds you now, 0 for the place where words are no longer needed. If counting does not help, skip it entirely. The night does not grade you. So let the words end here, or let them blur into sound, or let them stop while your breath continues, simple and faithful. The Irish landscape, real and imagined, holds its roads and its bells. Your room holds you. Sleep, when it comes, will hold you too. Gently, without instruction. Like mist holding moonlight. If you need a last image, let it be simple. A shamrock's 3 leaves resting in a steady hand, green and ordinary, carrying more meaning than force. You do not have to walk to the horizon. You can let the path continue without you, while you remain here, warm, still, unwinding. If you are still awake, that is not failure. Resting is allowed even when consciousness lingers like a lantern left on low. You can stay in the wide calm of this story, floating, while the world outside your window keeps its own hours. You can let the words become music without meaning, sound without task, a murmur like water over stone. If you prefer silence, you can let the narration end in your mind and remain only with breath, only with the soft weight of blankets, only with the knowledge that nothing in this moment requires proof. Patrick's story has already done its work as a story. It has brought you here to the edge of sleep, to the quiet field where thoughts grow thin. You might imagine your room as a small chapel off a larger landscape, sheltered from wind, brushed by the same peace that holds hills at dusk. You might imagine your breath as a tiny breeze, enough to move a leaf, not enough to disturb depth. You might imagine your mind as surface water slowly stilling until reflection becomes clear, then irrelevant, then unnecessary. And if you drift, let the drift be gentle. Let dreams be mild, if dreams come. Let the legend live on in the deep place where stories live, needing neither praise nor proof. Let the roads stand, whether you dream of them or not. Let the night go on being night, faithful, patient, older than argument. If you notice one last stray thought, treat it like a feather on the surface. There, then carried aside by a breath of wind. The pool of your attention is wide enough. The night is patient. The body knows how to slide towards sleep the way a boat slides from shore when the rope loosens. Not all at once, but with a motion that feels inevitable once it begins. There is nothing more you must learn from this episode to deserve rest. There is nothing more you must prove to the field of your own mind. You listened. That is enough. Patrick, in the end, is not only a name on a calendar, he is part of Ireland's long practice of remembering that mercy can travel in small things, and that a life can turn toward light without shouting. The night holds you, the story holds you, until you no longer need the words, only the stillness, only the slow current carrying you toward morning without hurry, without noise, without anything but rest. When morning comes, it can come as slowly as this tale prefers. You do not have to meet it with a list. You can meet it the way a field meets light. Gradually, blade by blade, then the whole quiet width of day. That is later. This is now. Now is for drifting, for softening, for letting the shoulders go one last time, for trusting that stories can end gently and still leave sweetness behind. The hills, the shores, and the old bells keep their places in the world, whether you dream of them or not. You have borrowed their calm for a little while. You can return it with gratitude that does not need words, only rest. Good night.